Welcome to my writing desk. It might look like wrinkled linen, but believe me, there's a drop-down desk underneath. This piece of furniture was a thrift shop find from a couple of years ago. It spent quite a few months covered with odds and ends. Then a few weeks ago, I cleaned the entire studio, and now I'm trying out a recording setup here. Hi, I'm Irene. Yeah, I wanted to try taking my pen and ink footage at this desk. That way my drafting table is left free for painting projects. We're still figuring things out, camera angle, lighting, that sort of stuff. This is my first time trying out the Pilot Petit. It's one of those mini or pocket-sized pens. Although, who is putting fountain pens in their pockets? I don't know. The only pockets I have are on my behind and at my hips, neither of which is a place I'd want to store a hard, pointy object with a chance of leaking. On the subject of leaking, that's exactly why I applied a generous slathering of lubricant on the threads. It looks like a lot, but I decided to eyedropper the barrel rather than use a cartridge. It's been 2 weeks since this footage was taken, and so far there's been no leakage. The ink I paired with this pen is Pilot Iroshizuku Asa-Gao. It looks like that name translates to Morning Glory. Although it's a pleasant enough medium blue, there's nothing striking about it. But since I tend to favor browns and greens, I figured featuring a blue here and there might keep things interesting. That's Inkworks for you. You never know what's coming next. By the way, that orange glass container, it's simply a votive candle holder. I don't have many candles, so most of my holders are decorative. This one is the right size and shape for plonking an ink cartridge in, or for stabilizing a small ink bottle. For some reason, whenever I use blue ink, I ask myself, is this an Elsa blue? I don't think I'm hung up on Disney princesses, but maybe it's my subconscious telling me to draw her already. If so, that's for another time. Today's sketch has nothing to do with fairy tales. That does remind me, though, do you recall those old illustrated volumes of collected fairy tales? There were a bunch of them, all named after a color, like the blue fairy book and the green fairy book, and so on and so forth. I believe they were first published around 1900, give or take a decade. I often had one or another on loan from the library during my teen years. Oddly, I never got my hands on the Violet volume. At the time, I figured it must be the best one, since it was never available. But more likely, it was simply lost or got cut up for the pictures. But, I mean, how cute is the Pilot Petite? It's compact and a little stocky. It's like the Nelwyn of fountain pen world. Why did I just reference Willow? I haven't watched that movie since the 80s, when it was first released. It was fun, but also silly and derivative. In my opinion, the best thing about it was Val Kilmer, because Val as Mad Mardigan was at peak hotness level. Just saying. I've dedicated this particular journal to fountain pen ink sketches. It's a Midori MD notebook. The paper has a soft cream color, and the surface is smooth without being slick. I think this paper works really well under normal writing conditions, but due to the nature of sketching and a heretofore undiscovered tendency for aggressive overdrawing, means that I'm doubling up pages to avoid heavy ghosting and show-through. Which is fine, since 176 pages would take me forever to fill. Like the other previous ink doodles, this was made up on the spot. I simply placed my eyeglasses in front of me and used it as a starting point. So now I'm going to share some of the thoughts I had during this ink doodle session. I've worn corrective eyewear since grade school, so I don't remember a time when I wasn't the shy girl with the glasses. And while I feel lucky to have avoided the worst kinds of bullying, there were still kids who used any excuse to make others miserable. As I tell you about these experiences, you might think, OMG, this is totally going to be a villain origin story. No, it's not. Trust me. I'm not harboring ill will towards old schoolyard bullies. One of them actually moved into our neighborhood just 2 houses down. I didn't even recognize her. She had to tell me who she was. A vengeful person would have taken that opportunity to get some 40-year-old payback, right? But I simply laughed over it with producer Mike, because I'm not the villain of this story. That was some years ago, and she's moved away since. Look, my school days could have been worse, but that doesn't mean I have many fond memories of that time. Both students and teachers repeatedly told me to speak up. We can't hear you in the back. It may have been difficult at the time, but I've since realized that's what initially motivated me to develop my speaking voice, specifically enunciation, modulation, and projection. After years of working in retail and dealing with the public, I was able to further hone that skill. Dare I say it's my superpower? Yeah, I see it as a good thing. But other life experiences can leave you struggling to find a positive side. I loved watching the movie Mean Girls. I've seen it several times, but that doesn't mean I've forgotten how awful it felt to have the cool kids ignore you, or worse, harass you. This next anecdote is what I call cafeteria kerfuffle. I think it was 7th grade. There I was, trying to choke down Chicken a la King with a half pint of 2% milk, when Joe Football Jock approached and threatened me with bodily harm. What had I done? Stolen his wallet? No. Dumped pudding into his locker? Again, no. Thrown food at him? Well, apparently he thought yes. Like so many quiet gals, I was observant. So I'd caught the earlier part where a popular girl sneakily tossed something at him, then rushed to his side, whispered in his ear, and pointed at me. If this were a movie, the only satisfactory ending would be for me to lock them both outside the mall during the zombie outbreak. But again, I'm not the bad guy here. Instead, it's been bottled up for decades and inappropriately released in a YouTube video. As for the doodle, it all looks like it was smooth sailing, right? Wrong. I am not a fan of that nib. Being a bit of a dry writer is one thing, but surely, in this day and age, there's no excuse for a scratchy nib. Especially when I keep hearing from other users how smooth their pilot nibs are, regardless if it's a design flaw or merely a lapse in quality control. Be better, pilot. So, to wrap up the whole school years reminiscence thing, one day at work, about 20 years ago, a man entered the shop and said, "Irene, do you remember me?" It turned out we'd been grade school classmates and also attended the same middle and high schools. We never hung out or anything, but I was still embarrassed about not recognizing him. I mean, to my preteen eyes, he'd been the cutest boy in class. After some brief chit-chat, he asked if I'd kept in touch with the old gang. And here's where I regret skipping that day's lunch, because I expect a bit of hanger was to blame for my response of, no, I don't have a lot of great school memories, because that threw a wet blanket over the conversation right quick. Logically, I know I shouldn't feel bad. He was part of the popular kids group, one I never felt a part of. Now, whether that was due to them being snooty or my own antisocial tendencies, at that point it was all moot. But the thing is, I don't want to be rude or dismissive of people. That's not my jam. And unfortunately, that day I was both. Rude and dismissive, I mean. So it stuck with me. Like jam. If there's one thing we've learned here, it's that I've got some baggage. But besides that, we've learned this Pilot Petit fountain pen is adorable. That said, this particular one with its fine nib frustrated me with a certain amount of dryness and even a bit of scratchiness. It's hard to maintain objectivity sometimes because by this point in my fountain pen journey, I've also learned that my personal preference is for medium nibs. That's for a couple of reasons. One, I've yet to encounter any dry, scratchy medium nibs, and two, their lines are a lot easier for my bespectacled eyes to see. The point is, no, this pen wasn't tearing up the paper, but I've had smoother, more pleasant fountain pen experiences. I'm happy to share this inky doodle. Thanks for watching and for hanging around until the end. It can't be comfortable witnessing someone else's navel-gazing, and I have a sneaking feeling that holding on to past incidents isn't entirely healthy. But it makes for good story times, yeah? Until next time, remember, when making in-store announcements, the less hostile you sound, the happier your shoppers will be. And totally stay artsy, my friends.